Kira Jackson looked up from her paperwork as the door to the Anderson and Associates reception area opened quietly. Behind the glass partition, she saw the silhouette of a man in a courier service uniform holding an envelope and looking around uncertainly, as if it were the first time she'd been in a place like that. Kira glanced at her watch. It was 3:30 in the afternoon, the lull between the lunch break and the return of customers. She stood up from her desk, straightening her dark blue skirt. Her 27th year of life had left subtle traces of fatigue on her face, which she skillfully concealed with foundation and a professional smile. Maybe it was the way he was looking into her eyes, not looking away and not trying to study her figure furtively, as many men do. Or maybe it was the fact that he was in no hurry to finish the conversation and leave, as if he was really interested in talking to her. Anderson and Associates' office was located in downtown Tulsa, on the 8th floor of a modern building with panoramic windows. It overlooked the busy streets of the city where people scurried about their business at this time of day. Kira often admired this view during her short breaks, dreaming of someday being among these free people who could go anywhere. "Good afternoon," she said as she opened the reception door. "Are you here to see us?" He was a man in his 30s, with neatly trimmed hair and attentive brown eyes that showed sincerity. His blue shirt bore the Express Messenger logo, and his name tag read Trent Harris. He looked athletic, trim, and moved with that easy confidence that comes with people who are used to spending a lot of time on the move. "Yes, I have some papers for Mr. Anderson from the Stellar Corporation." He held out a thick, sealed envelope. "Need the recipient's signature." Kira accepted the papers, and their fingers casually touched. His hands were warm and slightly rough, workmanlike. Trent smiled, and there was something genuine, casual about that smile. Not at all the on-duty politeness she was used to with clients and service providers. "Mr. Anderson is in court until 4, she explained, glancing at the appointment schedule in her notebook. "He has a hearing on Coleman v. Industrial Solutions. I can accept on his behalf if it's not critical." "Sure, no problem." Trent pulled out an electronic signature tablet. "Have you worked here long?" "Just the interior is impressive, feels solid." Kira looked around at the familiar furnishings, expensive dark wood furniture, leather chairs in the waiting area, abstract paintings on the walls. All this was supposed to inspire confidence in clients and emphasize the status of the company. "It's been 3 years, she said, signing the tablet. "You get used to everything. Are you new to this route?" "In the past, it was always a woman, Martha, I think." "That's right, Martha Williams. She retired last month after 20 years with the company." Trent put the clipboard back in his bag, but he was in no hurry to leave. "Now I'm covering her station along with mine. I'll admit, I get a little nervous in such serious offices. Lawyers always seem like people from another world to me, with their 3-piece suits and smart speeches." Kira laughed softly, and it was the first genuine laugh she'd had in a long time. "Believe me, we are the most ordinary people, just in suits more expensive than average, and with a habit of using complicated words where we could do with simple ones." "Are you a lawyer too?" Trent asked curiously. "Oh no, I'm an assistant. I prepare documents, schedule appointments, keep an eye on the calendar, and sometimes attend meetings to take minutes. All the rough work without which attorneys couldn't shine in the courtroom." Trent nodded with understanding. "So you're the man who holds everything on his shoulders, while the bosses take the credit." There was no condescension or pity in his words, only recognition of the importance of her job. Kira felt something warm spill into her chest. "Something like that," she agreed. Trent lingered at the door as if he wanted to add something, but then he seemed to pull himself back. "Well, I guess I'd better get going. There's still a lot of addresses on the list, and time is of the essence." He headed for the exit, then turned around. "By the way, if you need urgent delivery, contact our service. We have good rates and fast delivery times." "I'll keep that in mind." Kira gave him a look. "Have a good day, Mr. Harris." "You have a good day too, Ms." He raised his eyebrows questioningly. Jackson. Kira Jackson. Nice to meet you, Kira. See you later. After he left, Kira returned to her desk, but her thoughts didn't want to focus on the documents. Something about this man seemed surprisingly familiar to her, even though she knew for a fact that she was seeing him for the first time in her life. Maybe it was the way he was looking into her eyes, not looking away and not trying to study her figure furtively, as many men do. Or maybe it was the fact that he was in no hurry to finish the conversation and leave, as if he was really interested in talking to her. The workday dragged on slowly, as it always did on Wednesdays. After lunch, Mr. Anderson returned, an older white man with graying temples, an expensive watch, and a habit of talking too loudly on the phone. He wasn't a bad boss, fair and not picky about little things, but he kept his distance with all the employees. Kira handed him the paperwork from Stellark Corporation and began preparing materials for tomorrow's corporate fraud hearing. At 4 o'clock, the firm's junior partner, Mr. Collins, a young, ambitious lawyer who liked to emphasize his importance, walked into the office. He brought a stack of documents to copy and demanded everything be done by tomorrow morning. And make sure everything is stapled and numbered correctly, he added, in the tone one uses with children. There were some numbering errors last time. Kira nodded silently, though she remembered perfectly well that there had been no mistakes. Mr. Collins had simply mixed up the order of the documents, but it was useless to argue. At 5 p.m., she finished all her business, packed her things, and headed out. It was drizzling outside, a light rain, typical of Oklahoma this time of year. Gray clouds covered the sky, and it looked like dusk was coming earlier than usual. Kira opened her folding umbrella and walked to the bus stop. Home was half an hour away by public transportation in a quiet neighborhood with small one-story houses and neat lawns in front of them. On the way, she thought about the evening ahead. Deshawn usually got home around 6, which meant she had time to shower and relax a bit. Maybe cook something simple for dinner. He wasn't picky about food and always praised her culinary experiments, even the not-so-successful ones. The bus arrived 10 minutes late, packed with tired people after work. Kira settled against the window and watched the streets go by. Tulsa wasn't the biggest city in America, but it wasn't a small town either. You could get a job here, rent a decent place to live, and get lost in the crowd if you wanted to. Really, if you wanted to. That was the main condition. The house he and Deshawn had been renting for 2 years was at the end of a quiet street. Small but cozy, with a tiny garden in front of the entrance and a garage for one car. The neighbors were elderly, non-conflicted people who preferred not to meddle in other people's affairs. That's why Deshawn had chosen this place. No one asked unnecessary questions or showed excessive curiosity about the young couple's private life. Deshawn was home. His car, a used blue Honda Civic, stood in the driveway, and the warm, yellowish glow of the desk lamps poured from the windows. Kira stepped up onto the small porch and put the key in the lock, mentally adjusting herself to the home mode of communication. "Hi, honey." Her husband stepped toward her from the living room, wiping his hands with a kitchen towel. Deshawn Jackson was of average height, lean, with a neat beard, and soft facial features that made him look younger than his 30s. In everyday life, he seemed more like a shy introvert than a man with flamboyant needs. Right now, he was wearing his home clothes, gray sweatpants and a t-shirt with the logo of IT Solutions, the company where he worked as a programmer for the 5th year. "Hi." Kira hung the wet coat in the closet near the entrance and took off her shoes, placing them on a special shelf. "How's work going?" "The usual routine. Fixing bugs in a new module for the banking system, the testers are always finding problems in the most unexpected places, and the managers are rushing deadlines." He put his arm around her shoulders and kissed her cheek. "How was your day?" "Nothing special either." "Lots of paperwork, preparing for tomorrow's meeting." Mr. Collins brought in work at the last minute again. They went into the kitchen, small but functional, with white fronts and black countertops, and Deshawn had already started cooking dinner, something bubbling quietly in a pot on the stove, smelling of basil, tomatoes, and garlic. He wasn't a bad cook, liked to experiment with recipes found on the internet. "I'm making seafood pasta your favorite," he said, stirring the sauce with a wooden spatula. "I bought fresh shrimp at Walmart. They were on sale today." Kira nodded and poured herself some water from a filtered pitcher. Deshawn continued to fiddle with the stove, whistling a tune under his breath. The picture of domesticity and family happiness. "By the way, I was thinking about the weekend," he said, not turning to her. "Why don't we go somewhere? It's been a long time since we've been out together, all work and no work." Kira froze with the glass at her lips. In her husband's voice there were subtle notes that she had learned to recognize during 3 years of marriage. The tone became a little lower, the words more streamlined. "Where were you thinking of going?" she asked, trying to sound as neutral as possible. "Remember that place outside of town, 40 minutes down the highway?" Deshawn still didn't turn to her, continuing to stir the sauce and add spices to it. "Where we were a month ago. You seem to like it." Kira gripped the glass tighter, her knuckles turning white. No, she didn't like it. She didn't like it at all. But it was not only useless, it was dangerous to say so. "I'll think about it," she said carefully. "Well, don't rush into a decision." Deshawn turned to her with his usual homely smile. "We have time to talk things over. By the way, there are some new opportunities. I've been looking at the reviews on the internet, and people are writing very interesting things." He said it so casually, as if it was about choosing a restaurant or a movie theater. Kira felt a familiar chill in her stomach. "I see," she said. "Will the pasta be served soon?" "In about 10 minutes. Go get changed. I'll set the table." Kira went into the bedroom, trying not to show her inner tension. The room was decorated in calm colors, beige walls, dark furniture, a large bed with white linens. On the walls hung a few family photos and abstract paintings bought in IKEA. It looked like something out of an interior design magazine, beautiful but impersonal. She changed into homemade jeans and a soft sweater, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her reflection in the mirror of the large closet. An ordinary 27-year-old woman, not standing out from the crowd. Dark skin without blemishes, short curly hair, which she always neatly styled in the morning with the help of special products. Unflashy but pleasant appearance, which does not attract too much attention on the street. When she returned to the kitchen, she found the table set and appetizingly smelling pasta in beautiful plates. Deshawn had already opened a bottle of white wine and poured it into glasses. "Let's celebrate the middle of the week," he said, raising his glass. "To being together." Kira clinked it and took a small sip. The wine was good, not too sweet and not too sour. At dinner they discussed the usual things: plans for the rest of the week, news from work, trivial household matters. Deshawn told a funny story about his colleague who had managed to block his own program, and Kira even laughed heartily a couple of times. From the outside, they did look like an ordinary married couple spending a quiet evening at home after a day's work. But when Deshawn casually mentioned that place outside of town again, suggesting they try something new that we haven't done yet, Kira felt that familiar chill again. She knew what those innocent-looking words meant, and she knew that simply saying no wouldn't be enough. "We'll see," she said neutrally, clearing the empty plates from the table. Deshawn nodded contentedly and turned on the television in the living room. The rest of the evening passed relatively quietly. He watched the news and some nature documentary. She read a book, a Toni Morrison novel she'd been meaning to finish for a long time. At 10 p.m. they went to bed, and Deshawn only kissed her goodnight on the forehead, demanding nothing more. Lying in the dark and listening to her husband's steady breathing beside her, Kira thought about the courier who had come this afternoon, about how naturally he smiled and how easy it was to talk to him without the constant internal tension and the need to weigh every word. Trent Harris. I wondered if she'd ever see him again, and if she did, would she dare to talk to him about anything more than a business necessity? Friday began with a torrential downpour that drummed on the office windows and made people outside shiver under umbrellas. Kira arrived at work earlier than usual, around 8 in the morning, when the building was still quiet and deserted. She liked those quiet hours in the morning, when she could sort through her mail and get ready for the workday without the constant calls and fuss. In the 2 days since the courier's visit, she'd caught herself listening to the sounds in the hallway several times, expecting to see the familiar blue uniform of the delivery service. But Trent Harris never showed up again, and Kira was beginning to think their encounter had been a chance episode that wouldn't happen again. Around 11 in the morning, she got a call from Aisha Walker, her best friend from her college days. "Hi, friend." Aisha's voice sounded cheerful and energetic as always. "How's it going? It's been a while." "Hi, Aish. The usual, I'm working." Kira lowered her voice, even though Mr. Anderson was in court and there were no other employees around. "Listen, why don't you meet me today? I have lunch from 12 to 1 o'clock. Maybe we could go to that cafe on Main Street that makes great sandwiches." Kira took a quick look at her work schedule. There were no urgent matters scheduled for the lunch hour. "Okay, meet me out front at 1:30. "Great, see you then." Aisha Walker worked as a credit analyst at First National Bank of Tulsa, a 5-minute walk from the law firm. They'd been friends for 8 years, ever since they'd met in an economics course at Oklahoma State University. Aisha was one of the few people Kira truly trusted. The City Corner Cafe was located in the basement of an old building and was known for its homey atmosphere and inexpensive but delicious food. When Kira came down the narrow stairs, Aisha was already sitting at a table by the window studying the menu. She was a tall, slender woman with short hair and expressive eyes, always dressed tastefully and with the confidence of a successful businesswoman. "Kira!" Aisha stood up and hugged her friend tightly. "I missed you so much. It seemed like we hadn't seen each other for ages." 3 weeks is not an eternity," Kira laughed, sitting down across from her. "But it's good to see you too." They ordered turkey sandwiches and coffee, and while they waited for their orders, they exchanged news from work. Aisha was talking about a new project to restructure the bank's loan portfolio, and Kira was talking about a complicated corporate fraud case that had been pending for 3 months. "How are things at home?" Aisha asked when the waitress brought their order. There was a note of special attention in her voice. Kira took a sip of her coffee, buying time. Aisha was the only person who knew about some of the problems in her marriage, though not all the details. "In different ways," she answered cautiously. Deshaun had recently become more persistent in his requests. Aisha frowned. "What do you mean? Is he forcing those things on you again?" "Not here, Aish." Kira looked around at the neighboring tables. "It's too crowded." "Then let's take a walk after the cafe. I still have half an hour." They ate quickly and went outside. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still covered the sky. Aisha took Kira to a small park nearby, where it was almost deserted at this time of day. "Tell me about it," Aisha said, as they sat down on a bench under a large oak tree. Kira was silent for a long time, searching for words. "He wants to go to that place in the country this weekend. Again." "That hotel with the themed rooms?" "Yeah. And he says he wants to try something new. I can't even imagine what he's got in mind this time." Aisha took her friend's hand. "Kira, this can't go on indefinitely. You understand that, don't you?" "I do, but what can I do? If I refuse, he will insist, persuade, pressure, and then he'll get his way." "And if you run away?" Kira looked at her friend in surprise. "What do you mean, run away?" "I'm serious. You'll pack your things and leave. I have a friend in Kansas City who can take you in for the first time. Get a job, get a place, start a new life." "Aisha, you're crazy. I'm married. We share a house. We share bills." "What house? You're renting it. You can close the accounts in 1 day. You can find a job anywhere. Good paralegals are needed in any city." Kira shook her head. "It's not that easy. Deshaun will be looking for me." Let him. You'll get a divorce in absentia, and that'll be the end of it. Kira, face it. It's not marriage. It's coercion. Normal husbands don't force their wives to do things they don't like. He's not forcing. He just does. Maybe not physically, but mentally. You're afraid to say no, afraid of his reaction. That's coercion. Aisha spoke quietly, but very convincingly. There was a logic in her words that was hard to argue with. But I don't have the money to run away. Our savings are in a joint account, and my salary is only enough for current expenses. I have money. I'll lend you $5,000 or $6,000 for the first time. It will be enough for a ticket, rent for a month or two, and minimal expenses until you find a job. Kira looked at her friend with amazement. Are you ready to give me that amount of money? Of course I am. We've been friends for 8 years. I can't watch you suffer. Think about it seriously, okay? There's still time. Okay, I'll think about it. Kira got up from the bench. I gotta go to work. Can I call you tonight? Tomorrow would be better. Deshawn will be home tonight. Aisha nodded understandingly and hugged her friend tightly goodbye. Kira spent the rest of the working day thinking. Aisha's offer sounded both tempting and frightening at the same time. On the one hand, the opportunity to start a new life without constant fear and coercion seemed like a dream. On the other hand, it meant to completely destroy the familiar world, to leave everything familiar and go into the unknown. In the evening at home, Deshawn was in a good mood. He grilled steaks and opened a bottle of red wine for dinner. Over the meal, he talked about work. Today, his team had successfully launched a new module of the banking system they had been working on for 2 months. Tomorrow we're all going to the bar to celebrate, he said. It's been a long time since we've gotten together as a team. Do you want to come with me? I don't think I would be appropriate in your company of programmers, Kira answered. Nonsense. The guys remember you and love you. Remember the corporate party last year? Everyone liked you. Kira remembered that night. Deshawn had drank more than usual, and all the way home told her how her colleagues praised her looks and manners. And at home, he demanded she play one of the scenarios he'd looked up on the internet. We'll see how the mood strikes, she said evasively. After dinner, Deshawn retired to his home office, a small room they had converted into a workspace. There was a powerful computer, 2 monitors, and a comfortable chair. Officially, it was a place for freelance projects and learning new technologies, but Kira knew her husband spent time there for more than just programming. She settled herself in the living room with a book, but she couldn't read. Her thoughts kept returning to her conversation with Aisha. Escape. The word sounded both frightening and appealing at the same time. What if I really tried it? What if we packed our things and just disappeared? Around 10 p.m., muffled sounds came from the study. Deshawn was watching something on the computer. Kira knew it was best not to disturb him at times like this. She went to take a shower and got ready for bed. Deshawn's cell phone was on the nightstand in the bedroom. He had forgotten to take it with him to his office. Kira looked at the screen and saw several notifications from the browser. Curiosity got the best of her. She carefully unlocked the phone. She had known the password for a long time and opened the browsing history. What she saw made her go cold. Dozens of links to sites with extreme content, forums where coercion and submission techniques were discussed, videos of practices that made her stomach clench. And that was just for today. One of the last links led to the website of the very hotel outside of town. Deshawn studied the catalog of their services and read reviews from visitors. Some of the descriptions were so explicit and cruel that Kira hastily closed the browser. She put her phone back and went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. Aisha's words about running away and the pictures from her husband's phone screen were spinning in her head. What would happen if she didn't agree to go to the hotel? And what would happen if she did? Around midnight, Deshawn finally left the office and went to bed. He was in a good mood, hugged her, and kissed her neck. Tomorrow we'll discuss our weekend plans, he whispered in her ear. I found some interesting options. Kira remained silent. pretending to be asleep, but her insides clenched with fear. She knew what his interesting options meant, and for the first time in 3 years of marriage, she thought seriously that running away might not be a crazy fantasy, but the only way to escape. Lying in the dark next to her husband, who was a quiet programmer by day and at night turned into an obsessive explorer of human boundaries, Kira thought about Aisha's words. $5,000 or $6,000, a ticket to another city, a new job, a new life. Could it be real? Saturday came gray and rainy. Kira woke up early, around 7 in the morning, to the sound of drops drumming on the roof. Deshaun was still asleep, lying on his back with his mouth half open. At times like this, he seemed completely harmless, a normal 30-year-old man, tired after a week's work. She got up quietly and went into the kitchen to make coffee. Outside the window, it was a typical Oklahoma autumn. Gray skies, bare tree branches, wet asphalt. The weather accurately reflected her inner state. Last night, Deshaun had finally decided they were going to the hotel, and none of her attempts at evasion had worked. "So, it's been a long time since we've spent any real time together," he said over dinner, flipping through something on his tablet. "We need to freshen things up, add some newness to the relationship." Kira knew it was useless to argue. When Deshaun made decisions like this, he became remarkably persistent and inventive in finding arguments. It was better to agree and hope things would go without extremes. About 9 o'clock in the morning, her husband woke up and entered the kitchen, stretching and yawning. "Good morning, beautiful." He kissed the top of her head and poured himself some coffee. "Ready for our little adventure?" "When are we leaving?" Kira asked, not looking up from her toast. "After lunch. The room is booked for 6 p.m., so we'll have plenty of time." Deshaun was in a great mood. Showered, shaved, put on his best shirt and jeans. All day he fussed around the house, searching for something online on his phone, putting things in a small gym bag. Kira tried to look calm, but a familiar tension was growing inside. At 3 in the afternoon, they drove out of town. Deshaun was driving, music playing softly, and the suburban scenery, gas stations, small stores, fields with the occasional farmhouse, floated past the windows. A typical American countryside, peaceful and sleepy. "By the way, I've been looking into the new facilities there," Deshaun said, keeping his eyes on the road. "They've updated the catalog of services, added some interesting themed scenarios." Kira stared out the side window, not answering. "I think you're going to like it. There are options there for beginners and for more experienced couples. We'll try something in between." "Okay," she said quietly. The Fantasy Hotel was a 40-minute drive from Tulsa, in a wooded area away from the main highways. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary mid-range hotel, a 2-story red brick building, a neat parking lot, a discreet sign. Nothing gave away its specialty unless one knew in advance. Deshaun parked near the entrance and grabbed a bag from the trunk. They were greeted in the lobby by a smiling receptionist, a woman in her 40s in a business suit. "Welcome to the Fantasia. Is the reservation under the name Jackson?" "Yes, that's correct." Deshaun approached the front desk. "We've booked a themed room." "Of course, we're all set. Here are the keys to room 207 on the second floor. In the folder, you'll find a service catalog and contact information. If you need anything else, just call the front desk." They walked up the carpeted stairs to the second floor. The corridor was in muted colors, the lighting soft and unobtrusive. An ordinary hotel, if you ignored some of the interior details. Room 207 turned out to be a spacious room with an unusual layout. In addition to the standard furniture, there were various devices that at first glance might seem like decorative elements, but Kira knew their true purpose. "Excellent," Deshaun said with satisfaction as he looked around the room. "Just what I ordered." He pulled a few items he'd brought from home from his bag and set them on the table by the window. Kira tried not to look in that direction. "We'll take a shower first. Relax," he said, "and then we'll see what we can do." The bathroom also had a few non-standard elements: hooks on the walls, mirrors in unusual places, a shower stall larger than usual. Kira mechanically performed the usual actions: undressed, stood under the warm jets of water, soaped herself with fragrant gel. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a terry robe, Deshawn had already changed into home clothes and was studying a thick folder with a catalog of services. "Look at all the options." He showed her a page of detailed descriptions. "You can choose a ready-made scenario or make an individual program." Kira flipped through a few pages and quickly closed the folder. The descriptions were so detailed and explicit that her stomach clenched. "It's up to you," she said. "You're better at this." "Okay. I've already looked at a couple of interesting options." Deshawn ordered room service dinner, light appetizers, and champagne. While they ate, he talked about his plans for the evening as if he were discussing a tour program or a theatrical performance. There was nothing threatening or aggressive in his voice, only the enthusiasm of a man anticipating an interesting entertainment. "We'll start with simple things, and gradually we'll make them more complicated," he explained. "The main thing is to take your time and enjoy the process." After dinner, he asked her to change into a special kit he had brought with him. Kira went to the bathroom and put on what he had given her. Several pieces of lace and leather that exposed her body rather than covering it. When she returned to the room, Deshawn had already prepared everything she needed. There were various devices on the bed, with additional structures next to the bed. "Lie down," he said softly. "Relax and trust me." The next hour passed like a blur. Deshawn was surprisingly gentle and attentive, constantly asking if she was in pain, if everything was all right. It was as if he were following some pre-written instruction, making things more complicated step by step. Gradually, his actions became more and more intense. He used various items from his collection, experimented with positions, tried techniques he had obviously learned on the internet. Kira tried not to resist and just waited for it to be over. "Now let's try something special," Deshawn whispered, pulling out one of the items. "This will increase the sensation many times over." He began to apply a partial breath restraint technique he'd seen in one of the videos, gently at first, controlling each movement. Kira felt dizzy and a strange numbness in her limbs. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Everything okay?" She nodded, though it was getting hard to breathe. Deshawn took that as permission to continue. He increased the pressure while doing other things at the same time. There was a more pronounced intensity to his movements. He was clearly engrossed in the process and beginning to lose control of the situation. "It feels incredible, doesn't it?" he said, not noticing that Kira had stopped responding. The pressure continued to build. Kira tried to signal that she felt sick, but her hands were locked and she couldn't speak. Colored circles began to swim in her eyes, her consciousness slowly fading. Deshawn was completely absorbed in what was happening. He had followed the instructions from the video he had watched the day before, but he had failed to take into account the difference between professional actors and real people. A technique that looked safe in the video turned out to be deadly in reality. By the time he realized something was going wrong, it was too late. Kira wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was non-existent. He quickly removed the restraints and tried to bring her to her senses, but there was no response. "Kira! Kira, wake up!" He shook her by the shoulders, but her body remained lifeless. Panic seized him instantly. He didn't know what to do, how to explain what had happened, who to call. There was only one thought running through his mind. It was the end of everything. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all collapsed in an instant. Deshawn fumbled around the room trying to make a decision. Should he call an ambulance? But how to explain the circumstances? Stay and wait for someone to discover the body? But then he would be arrested right there. The instinct of self-preservation overrode all other considerations. He quickly gathered his things, dressed, and left the room, leaving Kira's body in the horrifying position in which she had died, twisted with signs of duress, in a humiliating position among the scattered devices. Descending the stairs, he tried to walk quietly, not attracting attention. In the lobby, the receptionist was busy with a phone conversation and paid no attention to him. He walked out to the parking lot, got into his car, and drove off without even looking back. All the way home, Deshawn thought about what he would say if they started questioning him. He made up a story about Kira going to a friend's house for the weekend and him staying home, but deep down he realized that it was only delaying the inevitable. At home, he took a shower, changed into clean clothes, and lay down on the couch in front of the TV. He turned on some movie and pretended to watch, but his thoughts kept returning to room 207 of the Fantasia Hotel, where his wife's body lay on the bed in the nightmarish state in which he had left her. Sunday morning at the Hotel Fantasia began as usual. Maid Rosa Martinez started work at 8 in the morning, taking a cart with clean linens and cleaning supplies. She had been working at the hotel for 5 years and was used to the specifics of the establishment, but what awaited her in room 207 surpassed all her ideas of human perversion. Rosa knocked on the door according to protocol, waited a minute, and inserted the key card into the lock. Checkout time for all guests was until 11 in the morning, and now it was 9:30. Usually by this time the rooms were already vacant. Entering the room, she didn't notice anything unusual at first. The usual mess after a night in a themed room, scattered clothes, empty glasses, a distinctive odor. But when she went to the bed to change the linens, what she saw made her scream so loudly that the sound echoed throughout the floor. The body of a young, dark-skinned woman lay in the center of the bed in an unnatural and humiliating position. Her arms and legs were secured with special devices. Dark marks were visible on her neck, and her face had a livid tint. Various objects were scattered around the body, the nature of which left no doubt as to what had taken place in the room. Rose ran out of the room and rushed downstairs to the receptionist. The manager on duty, Linda Thompson, immediately called the police and an ambulance, and then locked the room and posted a guard at the door. The first police crew arrived 15 minutes later. Sergeant Michael Stone, a 20-year veteran, surveyed the scene and immediately realized it was serious. He taped off the area and called in the investigation team and forensics. Detective Rashawn Clark received the call at 10 in the morning while having breakfast at home with the Sunday paper. He was 42 years old, had been with the Tulsa Police Homicide Unit for 17 years, and had seen all sorts of things, but each new case still left its mark on his soul. A tall, lean man with graying temples and keen brown eyes, Clark was known for his methodical nature and his ability to find details that others missed. He was divorced, lived alone in a small downtown apartment, and devoted himself entirely to his work. Arriving on the scene, the detective first spoke to the hotel receptionist. Linda Thompson, a middle-aged woman with neat hair and a business suit, was clearly nervous but tried to look professional. "The guests checked in at 6 o'clock last night," she explained, flipping through a computer printout. "A man and a woman, spouses on the paperwork. Deshawn and Kira Jackson, address in Tulsa. Booked a themed room for one night." "When were they last seen alive?" Clark asked, making notes in his notebook. "Ordered room service dinner last night around 8 o'clock. The waiter says they both seemed fine. The woman was quiet, but that's usual for our guests." "And this morning?" "No one saw them. Checkout time is until 11, and a lot of people leave early without checking in at the front desk. We don't particularly keep track of that." Clark nodded and went up to room 207. The forensics team had already begun their work, photographing the scene from various angles. Forensic scientist Denise Williams, a woman in her 50s with years of experience, was examining the body. "What can you tell me preliminarily?" the detective asked. "Death by asphyxiation," Williams said, not taking her eyes off the victim. "See the marks on the neck? Classic strangulation. Time of death was sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight. I'll be more specific after the autopsy. Signs of a struggle? Not likely. Most likely the restraints you see around here were used. Judging by the posture and the setting, it was in the context of sexual activity. Clark took a close look around the room. On the table by the window was paperwork, the victim's driver's license in the name of Kira Jackson, age 27. A photograph showed an attractive young woman with kind eyes. No man's ID was present. "Looks like the husband got scared and ran away," said CSI Tony Rodriguez, packing up the physical evidence. "Took his belongings, but left some of what he brought with him." There were indeed a few items left in the room that were clearly not part of the hotel's standard equipment. Clark ordered everything to be seized for analysis. By noon, the detective returned to the station and began a background check on the suspect. Deshaun Jackson, 30 years old, programmer at IT Solutions, clean criminal record, married to the victim for 3 years. Home address in a quiet Tulsa neighborhood. Clark dispatched a patrol crew to the Jackson home for a preliminary reconnaissance. Officers reported no one in the house. Jackson's car was missing. Neighbors said they had seen him last night, but there was no sign of activity today. The detective decided to wait and set up surveillance. Experience had taught him that fugitives often returned home to retrieve belongings or money, especially if the murder was unintentional. While they waited for the suspect to show up, Clark was busy gathering information. He talked to the Jacksons' neighbors, who described the couple as quiet and unconflicted. No one had heard any loud arguments or calls to the police about domestic violence. "Nice people," said Mrs. Parker, an elderly neighbor. "We always said hello, and my husband sometimes helped me with the shopping. The wife seemed a bit withdrawn, but I thought she was just shy." Sunday evening, Deshaun never showed up at home. Clark expanded the manhunt by sending out an APB to every police department in the state and neighboring states. Airports and bus stations were also notified. The breakthrough occurred Monday morning. On-duty officer Patrick O'Connor spotted the suspect's car in the parking lot of a shopping center in suburban Tulsa. Jackson was sitting in the car, staring into space. He looked awful, unshaven, eyes red from lack of sleep, wearing crumpled clothes. He hadn't resisted arrest. He even seemed relieved when the officers read him his license. "I knew you'd find me," he said quietly as they put him in the patrol car. At the station, Clark began his interrogation. Deshaun sat in the interrogation room, rubbing his hands together nervously and avoiding direct eye contact. "Tell me what happened Saturday night at the hotel," the detective began without preamble. Deshaun was silent for a few moments, then sighed heavily. "It was an accident," he said, barely audible. "I didn't mean to kill her." "Start from the beginning. Why did you go to that hotel?" We had certain interests in bed. Kira wasn't always ready to experiment, but I convinced her. I thought the special environment would help her relax." Clark wrote down every word without showing emotion. "What happened in the room?" Deshaun recounted the events of the evening without hiding the details of his actions. His voice grew quieter and quieter as he got to the point of using the breath restraint technique. "I saw it in the video, thought I knew what I was doing. But something went wrong. By the time I realized she wasn't breathing, it was too late." "Why didn't you call an ambulance?" "I was scared," Deshaun admitted honestly. "I realized no one would believe it was an accident. I thought about prison, about my life being over. I just panicked and ran away." "Do you realize you left your wife alone to die?" "She was already dead." Deshaun looked up at the detective. "I checked her pulse, her breathing. There was nothing." Clark continued to ask questions for another 2 hours, going over the details of the couple's relationship, the nature of their intimate life, the circumstances of the trip to the hotel. A picture was gradually emerging of his wife's gradual coercion to participate in extreme sexual practices. "Did Kira agree to this voluntarily?" the detective asked bluntly. Deshaun hesitated for a moment. "At first, no, but then she got used to it. At least she didn't actively resist." "And on Saturday night, did she want to do what you were doing?" "Not particularly, but I thought I could talk her into it in the process." By Monday night, Clark had enough evidence to file charges. Deshaun Jackson was arrested on a charge of aggravated second-degree involuntary manslaughter. His court-appointed attorney advised him to plead guilty in hopes of leniency from the court. An autopsy confirmed the medical examiner's findings. Kira Jackson died of asphyxia as a result of neck compression. No other serious injuries were found, which confirmed the version of involuntary manslaughter during sexual acts. Clark completed the investigation a week later. The case was forwarded to the prosecutor's office with a recommendation that the defendant's guilty plea be accepted in exchange for a sentence of 15 to 20 years in prison. As he sat in his office late that evening, filing the final paperwork on the case, the detective thought about how many similar tragedies he had seen in his career. Ordinary people who went too far in search of a thrill and ruined their lives with one careless move. Kira Jackson was dead at 27, and her husband would spend the best years of his life in prison. All because the lines between consent and coercion, between play and reality, were blurred to the point of disappearing. Deshaun Jackson was sentenced to 18 years in prison and sent to a maximum security prison, where he would remember that Saturday night in room 207 of the Fantasy Hotel every day for the rest of his sentence.